Over at BangTheBook.com, along with Kyle's outstanding piece, we've got Parker Michaels' daily NHL picks. I've got previews up for both of the conference championship games already. Also, my NFL opening line report. We'll have a lot of football content as we go throughout the week here, upcoming NBA and college basketball content. I'm still working really hard on my Major League Baseball stuff, so maybe we'll start to get some of that out a little bit here this week. But keep it tuned to BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Lots and lots of great stuff going on over there for you. Also, check out our YouTube page. Go to youtube.com, search Bang the Book. We've got a lot of good videos going up over there as well. We should have updated videos from Brian Blessing here, either today or tomorrow. A new video from me. And hopefully we'll get some Kyle Hunter videos here this week as well. As you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB200 is the promo code. It will get you a 100% deposit match bonus up to $500 for the sportsbook. Same thing for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. One guest on the program here today is we've got Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com and also BangTheBook.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
It's going well. How about yourself?
Doing well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always here, sir. Good to get you on for the full broadcast here today, and lots of things for us to talk about. So we'll go ahead and dive right in with the NFL. I don't remember the last time you and I talked a whole lot of NFL, maybe last year's Super Bowl, looking at props and things like that. But with no Joe Everett here today, wanted to make sure I got some NFL on the show. And you sent over some notes here, kind of looking back at the 4 games from the divisional round. And what stood out to you the most from this past weekend in the NFL?
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm kind of excited to talk NFL. I don't remember the last time we did talk NFL on the air. NFL is a sport which I've done pretty well. 55.5% since 2010. Not a high volume sport for me, but NFL is a sport where I think if you pick your spots, you can do okay. You probably don't want to play a ton because the lines are really sharp, obviously. NFL. Looking back at this past weekend, I got to watch some of those games, didn't get to watch some of the others. I'll say that the Rams running game really impressed me a lot. I think that Dallas run defense has been so good all throughout the season. You kind of figured the Rams would have to throw to be successful, and that wasn't the case. The Rams offensive line, very impressive. If they can keep playing like that moving forward, the Rams are going to be a really tough team to beat. Dallas was a team that had flaws, and I think everybody knows that. The Rams hadn't really played up to their potential in quite a while, but I think that that was a really important performance from them the other night. We know that the Rams have potential, and they showed it in the playoffs, and I think that was pretty important.
Yeah, I think so too, and it makes for such an interesting scenario here in this game this week against the Saints because the Rams didn't have to put it on the shoulders of Jared Goff. And that's not to say that Jared Goff played poorly. Obviously it wasn't a very standout performance from him, although 11 of his 15 completions did go for first downs. So when the Rams needed him, they were able to move the chains. But that's the question now for this Saints defense, which was very, very good against the run this season, only 3.6 yards per carry allowed. Do they sell out against the run and say, you know what, Jared Goff, you have to go in your first playoff road start and beat us. You have to be the one that takes the top off of this defense because we are going to stop the run. I'm curious to see if you can stop the Rams rushing attack with this two-headed monster now with C.J. Anderson, and if that is what the Saints try to do.
Yeah, if I was the Saints, that's what I'd try to do. I don't think that you can let them run the way that they did last weekend. I think that's a losing scenario. If you look at the Saints, I'll say that my pick yesterday in the NFL was a loss. I had the Eagles and the Saints over. Look, the Eagles couldn't do anything offensively after the first quarter. I think the Saints could have scored more if they needed to. It was more of a ball control game from the Saints. You remember they had that drive that was 12 minutes long? And I remember as I was watching that drive, I was thinking, even if they score, I'm going to lose the over because of this drive because they just used the entire quarter. The Saints really dominated the last 3 quarters of that game yesterday, and I think that, to me, Drew Brees still didn't look perfect. He missed a few deep throws. They had a couple of deep balls that, guys were wide open. He just missed them. I think that, you and I both know this, but Thomas is a tremendous receiver. I think that people got to see that yesterday, the kind of route runner that he is. has solid hands as well. I think the Saints obviously have a ton of weapons. It's going to be hard for the Rams to cover everybody that the Saints have, and obviously having a Kamara, really, really good weapon there out of the backfield is able to do everything. I think that the Saints are the team that you trust a little bit more based on the fact that, they've kind of been there, but the Rams have really high upside. I'm pretty sure that when you look at this contest going forward, the Rams and the Saints, the public's going to want to bet the over. It's at 57. I'm pretty sure the public will take the over regardless. We'll see what the sharps do as far as the total. I'm not sure on that one. And, what's going to be the public side here? I'm not really sure what will be the public side. I guess I would assume that people would want to lay the points with New Orleans, but we're sitting at -3.5. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts on who the public will take as far as the side.
I'm really wondering about the side myself, and I agree with your assessment of Drew Brees. I mean, there were some throws he missed, and I thought that the arm strength looked a little bit iffy at times, but the dude is so damn smart at playing the position. And, I was looking at some of Dan Orlovsky's breakdowns on Twitter of, the playoff weekend, and by the way, if you don't follow him on Twitter, he does a phenomenal job breaking down the X's and O's of the games and, reading things from a quarterback's perspective, and that's what Drew Brees did. Even though everybody in the building knew that the ball was going to Michael Thomas, he would look off of him. He would give him time to get open. Just a really savvy quarterback. And, it sort of makes up for some of the zip that he's lost on some of those passes. I'm curious what the Rams do differently, to try and stop Michael Thomas. Because, yes, it was a regular season game, but Thomas had 12 catches for 211 yards when these two teams met in the regular season. So what do they do to try and stop him? I mean, he finds soft spots in zone coverage. He gets off of press man coverage. He's just a phenomenal football player. And, I don't know if you can defend him at this point in time. As far as your question about the side here, I mean, I like the Saints a little bit in this spot. I just think that they have a more balanced offensive attack and more weapons that they can go to. If this becomes about Jared Goff, I don't know what he can do for the Rams. But, as far as the total goes, I think you will see the public on the over. Again, the first game had 80 points and I think 970 yards to it. I like the under, though. I think both of these teams will try to run the football. Obviously, the Rams don't want to put this in Goff's hands in that hostile environment. And I think for the Saints here, too, I mean, their running game keeps defenses honest, and it can be potent as well. So with the way that they controlled the ball, with the way that they kind of protected their defense from exposure last week, I think this is kind of a slow-paced, real high-percentage offensive play game. And when you talk about high-percentage offensive plays, not a lot of risk-reward, not a whole lot of downfield stuff. Teams are moving in smaller chunks. I think the under is the way to go. But I would sit and wait on it because I would expect it to tick up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the under is a scary play. I'll say that. As much as they scored in that first game and the potential that both of these offenses have. So I can't necessarily disagree with you, but I don't think I could take the under here. I think I would probably pass on that total, to be honest with you. It's I agree with you that New Orleans is moving it slower. They're getting in small chunks. The Rams will try to go fast. I mean, how much success will they have against the secondary of New Orleans is the big question here. And as far as the side, I would lean toward the Saints, as you said as well, at least my initial lean. Obviously I haven't had a chance to break this one down in depth yet, but I think that, expecting the Rams to go to New Orleans in a very tough environment, this is clearly a tough place to play, especially in the playoffs. It's going to be really loud. The Rams are still a younger team than New Orleans. The Rams have a high upside, and it's certainly possible that the Rams could win this game. There's no doubt about that. But, counting on them, ATS, I think is a little bit difficult to do. We've seen some signs of inconsistency here late in the season from the Rams. I think both of these coaching staffs are very good, so I don't think anybody really has a coaching advantage here. I think the home field advantage is very important in a spot like this.
Well, what about, I know that you mentioned this last week with regards to college football, so we'll mention this here as well. How about on special teams? Do you think that could make a difference in this game?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that, special teams could play a big role here. This is the time of the year where, You get down to the nitty-gritty and you have these games where, teams are favored by 3 or 3.5 points. Special teams could play a big factor into it. Now, with the way kickers are, most people just kick it right into the end zone. So usually it's going to be in the punt game or the field goals, who's better at that. If you look at these two teams, I'm pulling it up right now. The Rams and Saints, neither one of them are great on special teams. I believe that the Saints are a little bit better, if I recall correctly. It's one of those spots where I think the Saints do have a decent advantage here. The Saints are second in DVOA special teams, and the Rams are 17th. So actually the Saints have been pretty good. I know they have a pretty good kicking game, good punt return game. The Rams are middle of the pack. So I would see the Saints, if you need something to push you over the top, then that's another possible there.
Well, for the first time in NFL history, the top 4 scoring offenses are the 4 teams here in the conference championship round. So with that, we'll transition over to this game between the Patriots and the Chiefs. And I guess before we look ahead, we'll take a look back. What were some of your takeaways from those 2 performances last weekend?
Well, I thought the Chiefs were really impressive against the Colts, but then the question is, was that more of a great showing by the Chiefs or just a terrible showing by the Colts? And I think it was certainly some of both. Patriots just put it on the Chargers. That game was just never close at all. I will say I have a little bit of regret for not playing the Patriots in that game. It was one of those, especially when the line got down to 3.5. Yeah. I should have played the Patriots at that point, That was right before the game, so it would have been hard for me to release that as a premium play. But, when I saw 3.5, I should have bet that myself. It was one of those spots where the Chargers have been very good. They're a good team. But going to New England in the spots that they were in, as far as the travel that they were in, and beating Belichick and Brady, it's almost one of those spots where it probably would have been worth it just to pay to see it. And, I didn't do that, but I will say that I think the Patriots still have flaws as a team. I'm not going to go off of yesterday's game and think the Patriots are just an unbeatable team. I've seen too much from the Patriots that, they're a good team. I don't think the Patriots are a great team this year, and I think most people would agree with that. I think that, they had a great showing yesterday. What are they going to do coming up this weekend? I think it's going to be a little bit different for them because usually the Patriots are hosting this game, and obviously it makes a big difference whether you're the home team or the road team. We've got New England and Kansas City, and Kansas City is a really good home field advantage. So. I think the Chiefs had an impressive showing over the Colts. But like I said, was that more about the Colts? And then the Patriots, you could say the same thing, right? I guess I'm curious to hear your take on that too, whether it was more the Colts and the Chargers being that bad or whether it was good showings by those teams.
Yeah, it's tough. The Colts playing a 3rd straight road game, and I thought that this would be a problem for them. I wasn't sure it would be a problem so early in the game, but running around chasing Kansas City is not an easy thing to do, playing a 3rd straight road game and really having to fight for your playoff life. The last several weeks of the season here, they just kind of ran out of gas a little bit. I think that was also the case with the Chargers too. And, like you said, I played the 4 and, I was happy to take it and happy to get New England in there. But, I don't know if that was a commentary on how good the Patriots can be, if that was the Patriots getting back towards their ceiling, or just the Chargers. They just got blitzed early in that game, and that was pretty much that. So I'm not really sure, but I do think when you look at the whole body of work here, you probably have to like the Chiefs just a little bit more because I think that there's more sustainability to the performance that they had this past weekend. I don't know what to expect from Tom Brady. For Kansas City here, they're not a great defensive team. We all know that. I think the big concern for Kansas City this week is stopping the run and stopping Sony Michel. But, the Chargers weren't able to force Tom Brady to throw the ball down the field because Belichick and McDaniels exploited the hell out of the fact that they can't cover running backs. James White was targeted, 17 times in this game? I think he had 15 catches, something like that. Will the Chiefs make that adjustment? Can the Chiefs make that adjustment? On the other side, the Patriots, what does Bill Belichick do? What do we always talk about on this show? He takes away the other team's best player. Who is that for Kansas City? Is it Tyreek Hill? Is it Travis Kelce? It could very well be Patrick Mahomes, and you can't take him away. So what do the Patriots do schematically in this game? I don't really know. So I'm very intrigued with this game. I'm not as intrigued with the Rams-Saints game. I think the Saints are a pretty well-defined, better team in that spot as far as I'm concerned. But this Chiefs-Patriots game, I'm very intrigued by this one to see what this chess match looks like.
Well, I mean, I think the Chiefs are the better team here. I don't think, I have much question of who's the better team between the Patriots and the Chiefs. I think the question mark is more, you got a young team in the Chiefs. You got a veteran team who's been there that many times with the Patriots, and you've got Belichick versus Reed. And, that's a big question mark as well because Andy Reid's a good coach. I mean, he's gotten a lot of heck about how he's done in the playoffs, and he deserves that. But he's been a good coach in the regular season. And, I think that Andy Reid's a better coach than most people realize overall. Playoffs, he hasn't proven that. And obviously you have to give Belichick an edge there. So, to me, I would only be able to take the Chiefs if I was taking a side in this game. I can't take the Patriots. I've seen their flaws too many times. I remember watching the first game between these two teams, and it's one of those things where you try not to, look at one game too much. But the Patriots won that game by 3 points. I had the Patriots -3 in that one, and I remember feeling fortunate that they won by 3 because Kansas City was just getting big play after big play, and it was just too easy for Kansas City on offense. Can the Patriots put together a lot better defensive scheme here? I imagine it'll be better than before. I mean, I think the last game was, 43-40 or something really high. This is one of those where you wouldn't expect it to be as high as the game before, but it's hard to expect it to be a low-scoring game. And, New England's going to move the ball here. Are they going to get in the huge chunks? Probably not as much. Kansas City would probably be the bigger play offense in this one. I wanted to point out an angle here that, the forecast, the long-term forecast here is talking about temperatures being, now it says about 10, 11 degrees during this game, which obviously is pretty frigid. If you look at games that were played in really cold weather, whether this means something or not, or whether it doesn't mean much, I think it's certainly interesting. The games with a temperature of 29 degrees or lower since 2006 are 75 and 50 to the over in the regular season, and 19 and 11 to the over in the postseason. Now, as far as me, why do I think that is? I think that's because a lot of times people see cold weather and they bet, people are thinking, oh, it's going to be cold, it's going to be hard for them to even hold on to the ball, they're not going to get these big plays, and that gives more value to the over. So we'll see what happens in this game. Are people going to talk about the weather and say, hey, it's going to be 10 degrees, we need to bet this thing down? If they bet this thing down very much, I'm going to have to take the over. So I would say that's probably I certainly lean to the Chiefs, and I lean to the over in this game.
Well, and you want to pay attention to the forecast because there's expected to be another major storm rolling through the Great Plains and then on up into the Great Lakes here this weekend. So if that slows down, if the storm track changes, something like that, weather could wind up looking quite a bit different for this game. If this game was played on Saturday, it would be a stone cold, have 30-mile-per-hour wind gusts and some snow. So, again, pay attention to the weather forecast. Keep an eye on that. But, man, it's amazing to me. I wrote about this in the preview. When Tom Brady took over as the starting quarterback for the Patriots in 2001, Patrick Mahomes had just turned 6 years old. This is the 13th AFC Championship game for Tom Brady. And when he took over as the starting quarterback, Pat Mahomes was 6 years old. So, obviously, that's a factor that's going to get a lot of run. I don't know how much it matters in this game at this point in time because I do think Tom Brady's skill set is deteriorating and maybe pretty quickly at that. But should be a very interesting game here to say the least. The thing that I think I would look at here, and I may have a beer money bet on the Chiefs, and I don't mean the IPAs I usually drink. I mean like Stroh's or Schlitz or Hams or something kind of beer money. But I think the first quarter over is a decent look here because I think you're going to have the Chiefs wanting to push this tempo, wanting to make New England's defense a little bit uncomfortable. And you've got two pretty good coaches here. I know Andy Reid gets conservative late in games, but I would expect the scripted drives early on in the game to be pretty effective. I'd maybe be looking at the first quarter over and look at some other derivative types of plays or maybe some player prop type stuff as opposed to playing the full game side in total here.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Like I said, I do like the Chiefs. I like the over. As I've said before, when we do this early in the week, these are certainly my early leans, and I'll look into this game more, and I might change my mind. I don't think I'll take the other side, but I might not be playing exactly what my lean was. And certainly, like Adam said, the weather is something you want to keep a close eye on in this game, because if it is windy, if it's windy and precipitation, if snow and wind, then it's an underplay. If it's just cold and no wind, then it helps the over, or it doesn't do anything. It certainly doesn't help the under. So that's something I'll be watching closely, and I think that's a good reason to not be making a play on this game, at least till later in the week.
Well, if nothing else, I will say this. You look at these four teams that are still left standing here. Again, the top four scoring offenses in the NFL from the regular season. Super Bowl 53 has the chance to be a hell of a lot of fun. Last year's game was a blast, obviously. I'm salivating thinking about the prop betting market and trying to break down what these coaches are going to do, because, look, Andy Reid, maybe people kind of shit on the guy as a head coach, but his coordinators keep getting hired. His coaching tree has more branches than just about anybody. So obviously this dude can coach, and he can obviously teach the game. We all know about Belichick and giving him and Josh McDaniels 2 weeks to prepare. Sean McVay has now become the new Andy Reid in terms of his coaching tree. And then you've got Sean Payton and a very savvy quarterback in Drew Brees. So no matter what Super Bowl 53 matchup we get, I'm excited about that, and I'm excited to start digging into the prop market once those start to get posted.
I hadn't even thought about that, to be honest with you, as far as the prop market in the Super Bowl yet. But you're totally right. No matter who wins these games, we're going to have a pretty high total. We're going to have the potential of a lot of offense, a lot of big plays, and I think that could be very exciting. Like you said, some really, really good offensive minds as far as these coaching staffs.
Well, and of course, too, the fast track in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So weather won't be a factor for the Super Bowl this year. And, these two teams, especially if a team like Kansas City gets in there with some of the burners that they have, could be really, really interesting for a prop betting standpoint. And we'll talk a ton about props over the next 2 weeks here, once we know the Super Bowl matchup on Bang the Book Radio. So let's transition over to the college basketball side of things now for our Handicapping the Hardwood segment. And I guess let's go ahead and sort of start with, just something in general here. You and I touched on this a little bit last week. I touched on it with Brent on Friday's show as well. We've got a lot more public money in the college basketball market now. Are you seeing that when it comes to the odds and maybe some of the line moves that are going on out there?
I can see the line moves, happening more often. I can see, there's less of the games that start at, -5 and finish at -5. There's clearly more action in the market. Usually the lines are going to move some. I can see it also in the big name games with a team like a Duke, a team like a North Carolina. Like I said last week, I believe it's one of those spots where now everybody shows up and they say, "Oh yeah, I've seen on SportsCenter, Zion Williamson. I've seen Duke just, being on there all the time," and people, bet based on what they've seen, and we've talked about how that's really not a good idea. It's a very dangerous thing to kind of get the top level things from ESPN and try to bet based on that. And that's why I hope that everybody who listens to Bang the Book Radio, I would imagine they're not doing that. So, but there are a lot of people out there who do. And I think those people, throw their money around quite a bit this time of the year. Like you said, it's important to say that really college basketball doesn't get that much attention as far as the betting focus from a lot of people until after college football ends. And obviously it'll get full attention once the NFL's over. But even now, you've got NFL games just on Sunday, and then you've got a week off, and then the Super Bowl. So really college basketball is taking center stage quite a bit. The NBA obviously getting plenty of attention as well. But I think that it shows up in that there are a lot more line moves. I think that even in the totals market, early in the year in totals market, you can see some really drastic moves just because the odds makers don't really know what to do. Some of these teams are changing a lot. And then you almost see a little bit less of moves for a while because things are settling in. And then now we get to that point where the moves are bigger again because the public's starting to show up. So I think that's the thing that I noticed the most. It's just that, if you're good at predicting line moves in the market, it's a good time to be able to take advantage of that. And I'm sure that there are some people who would just bet a number just to be able to take the other side back later, because there's certainly opportunities for things like that this time of the year in the college basketball market.
Well, and I think Monday specifically is really interesting because you've got 6 big-time games: Nebraska, Indiana, Syracuse, Duke, Florida State, Pitt, Wisconsin, Maryland, Texas, Kansas, and then Baylor, Oklahoma State. 1 game from the MAAC, 1 game from the Big Sky, and then a bunch of conferences that, really up until this year were only available at certain sports books, and now they're posted market-wide. The Patriot League, the SWAC. You've got some of these conferences that generally are the MEAC. Some of these conferences that generally aren't lined actually getting posted now across the board. So you've got 6 games that are, 12 teams that everybody knows, and then the rest of the card is comprised of games that a lot of people don't know. So I'll be really curious to see how the lines move for those big 6 games, and then, what some value looks like out there for sharp players in those other games of conferences that, traditionally aren't lined or don't get a whole lot of information. And, that's something you mentioned on Friday in the article. You didn't have any listed picks for Friday's daily article, but you talked about, there are conferences on Fridays that people just don't know. The MAAC, the Ivy, stuff like that. So I would encourage listeners here to, err on the side of caution. If you haven't been doing a lot of college basketball right now, you may go out there and see Syracuse getting 16.5 against Duke and be like, well, Syracuse is usually good. How can the line be that big? Well, it is that big for a reason. It's coming down because I think the spot's not particularly great for Duke, and also Zion Williamson's hurt. But, when you look at these things and you say, well, how could it possibly be like that? If you haven't been paying attention for 2 months, there are reasons why it looks like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that it's really dangerous if you haven't paid attention for a long time to just jump right into the market. So if you haven't really paid attention to college basketball, I would encourage you to do things like listen to this show, read that daily article at BangTheBook.com, do as much research as you can, start in slowly, because there are a lot of things that are different than what you can remember from last year. And if you're betting on what you remember from last year or just what you heard on TV, you're not going to win. So most people don't win anyways. You want to be one of the knowledgeable people that, you pick your spots carefully. And I think that's why, the best thing to try to do, in my opinion, is when it's a small card, you don't have to play just as many games as you do on a Friday or Saturday. And I know that that's a mistake that a lot of people make. Some people think, well, I'm just going to play 4 or 5 games, and that's what I'm going to do every day. I could say you play 5 games on a Saturday. If you play 5 games on a Saturday, you're taking what? Less than 10%, obviously less than 10% of the game. Sometimes there's 130 games or something on a Saturday. And on a Monday night, if you're taking 4 or 5 picks, you're taking almost everything. So I think that you need to really just look for value. Don't have any set number of plays that you want to play in your mind. I think that that's a negative that some people have from the beginning. I'll get some of my clients that will say to me, I kind of like it more when we have 4 or 5 plays, or I like it more when we have at least 3 plays. But I'm not going to pick something if I don't think there's value there, and I don't think you should either as far as listeners. I think you should be just, looking at these, doing your research, and even if it means you don't have a play in a game, you can still follow along with what's happening in that game, either watching it or following the stats to try to learn on the next game. Maybe that's what you're trying to do right now is collect information, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
No, there definitely isn't. I mean, I think it's a great time, if you haven't paid too much attention to college basketball, to acquire that information. And again, you're going to hear us talk about this, and this is very important, but conference specialization. Pick one of those lower mid-majors, learn everything you can about it, and then attack that market, as opposed to trying to figure out, the 353 teams that are out there. Figure out 30 of them or 35 of them and play a couple of conferences and then look to have success in that way. So let's go to the Sun Belt here a little bit. I love talking Sun Belt. I noticed that both of your regression teams here today coming from the Sun Belt Conference. So let's start with the negative regression team that you're looking at. And I think this is a really fantastic one that you pointed out here today.
Well, I love the Sun Belt, and as many times as we can talk about the Sun Belt, we will. But Little Rock on offense, they're 15th in effective field goal percentage in the country so far this year, according to Ken Palm. They were 316th last year. Now, I think that they have a better coach now. I think they're going to be better on offense than they were last year. I certainly don't think they're 316th now, but that's a huge jump. 316th right up to 15th. In the 4 Sun Belt games they've played so far, they haven't played a good defense. So, when they play a team like a Texas State, a Georgia State, I really think this offense is going to struggle a lot more than they have so far. And the other thing that you have to point out is that they shoot the ball really well, but they have some serious turnover problems on offense. And, turnover problems aren't likely to fix themselves overnight. If you're turning the ball over, 20-some% of the time, it's not likely that you're just going to be able to fix that right away. They're turning the ball over in Sun Belt play 24.8% of the time. That's really bad. That's about as bad as you'll ever see from anybody. Now, what are they shooting? They're shooting 48.1% from three-point range. I don't think that can continue. I think Little Rock's a team that I'd like to look to fade here coming up. They do play Texas State on Thursday night. They don't play Georgia State for a good while. Coastal Carolina's a pretty good defense. I think when they play the better defenses here, Little Rock would be a good team to either take an under or play against.
I think so, too. I mean, they're a really intriguing team to look at here. I brought up their profile on Bart Torvik's website, barttorvik.com. And, now, you mentioned the turnover problems. They're also only shooting 63.2% at the free throw line. So this is a team that when some of those offensive numbers start to regress, they're not going to make up for it at the free throw line because they're not a very good foul shooting team. So, those are the types of things you want to look for, those outliers that, when things start to regress, they're going to have more than one problem.
Yeah, and they're only decent on defense. So their defense isn't going to win them a bunch of games. But right now they're winning games, against Troy and South Bama because they're shooting the ball well. And, they're not going to shoot the ball well every time. I think that Little Rock going forward would be a good fade against the better defenses. Now, am I saying that they're never going to shoot it well the rest of the season? Of course not. I mean, they've shown that they can shoot it a lot better than they did last year. I just think that, they have to regress to the mean from where they are right now. As far as the opposite side, UT Arlington on offense, they lost nearly everything from last year. They have a new coach. To be honest with you, I remember this being one of the biggest head-scratchers to me, why they fired the coach that they had before. I think Scott Cross had done a really good job there. The AD wanted somebody different. So now they have a new coach, and they lost a ton of people from last year. I will say that Chris Ogden, their new coach, did not have an easy job. As far as minutes continuity, according to Ken Palm, they're 349 out of 353. So essentially a whole new team. And UT Arlington, a really tough schedule so far this year. So they had scheduled up based on being a good team in the past, and they took a lot of lumps from in the first part of the schedule. You get Gonzaga, Missouri, Indiana, Arkansas, Texas. If you're UT Arlington and you have a whole new team, you're playing those teams, you're not going to win very many games, and they didn't. I like what I've seen the last couple games from them here, though. I like that UT Arlington is consistently playing solid defense. They're 125th in efficiency on defense, according to Ken Palm, in the country. And in the Sun Belt, they're third. So they're not giving up defensive rebounds. It's just one shot and done. UT Arlington, on the offensive end, has struggled quite a bit this year. I mean, I think they're 338th in effective field goal percentage offense. They're shooting 26% on three-pointers. I think a really inexperienced team like this is likely to shoot better than that in the long run, especially when you see they've played a really, really tough schedule. And as much as we like the Sun Belt, we know that the teams in the Sun Belt aren't nearly as good as Gonzaga and Arkansas, Indiana, teams like that. So I think that UT Arlington will be better on offense moving forward. Now, does it mean that they'll have a bunch of overs? Not necessarily, because they're playing good defense. I think it means I would look to back UT Arlington, especially when they're underdogs. And they have a couple games here coming up this week where they're going to be favored against Arkansas State and against Little Rock. Now, I do kind of like them against Little Rock. We just talked about them. But, when they're a big underdog against a team like Georgia Southern on the 24th, I think you could find some value in a game like that because you've got a team playing really good defense that should regress to the mean on offense. So I think UT Arlington could have some good value going forward.
Well, and you look at their loss to Georgia State on January 3rd, they only lost by 5 points in that game, and they were 2 of 25 from three-point range in that game. Wow. Then the loss to Georgia Southern at home, they were 6 for 28 from three. Last two games, though, couple of wins for them, 9 for 20 against App State, 11 for 31 against Coastal Carolina. So, maybe they're going to get some more of those shots to start falling for them. And again, keep that in mind, too, as you're kind of going through here. Team goes 2 for 25 from three, loses by 5. You have to assume there's some positive regression coming from that. So, even if you don't have time to handicap a lot of these games or handicap a lot of these teams, do the box score study, look for some outliers, look for some positive regression to the mean. Maybe that's a play in the next game.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And that's not something that is difficult for anybody to do. If you have a full-time job and you just want to handicap some on the side, that type of thing. I mean, you can look at some of these games and pretty quickly do a quick overview of box scores and get some teams that you think might be good to fade or follow. So, I mean, I think that that's certainly something that's doable without having a ton of time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know you and I talked about it with regards to the Akron game against Western Michigan. Now, they failed to cover last week against Central Michigan. They lost that game in overtime by a bucket. But, they shot, I think it was 29% in that win over Western Michigan, still found a way to win the game. So I did take Akron as a video pick for that game against Central Michigan, which they did lose in overtime. But, still, you're just looking for those opportunities to play back on a team that, should have a better performance or maybe got lucky with a win. Then you would think that they'd probably play a little bit better the next time out. So that is a pretty good starting point for people that are trying to dig into college basketball a little bit and not be too overwhelmed with everything that's going on. So, all right, let's get into the fade and follow segment here. And the fade team is definitely one I would certainly expect to fall off a little bit here.
Yeah, Mississippi, I'm going to start this out by saying, when I say they're a fade team, I'm not necessarily saying that I don't think they're well coached. That's not the case at all. I think Kermit Davis Jr. has done a tremendous job here. And look, he did a great job for years and years at Middle Tennessee. We know how they were before, and Middle Tennessee has fallen off badly, largely because they don't have the same players that they had. But obviously they're missing Kermit Davis as well. This is a Rebels team in Mississippi that has had potential for many years and has not been able to get to that potential very often at all. They might pull up one random upset and then they lose several games that they shouldn't have lost. Now Mississippi here is playing very well. They've won back-to-back huge games against Auburn by 15 at home and then on the road against Mississippi State where they hit a couple key shots right at the end of that game. Things couldn't be much higher on Mississippi right now. They're 14-1 ATS. I mean, you can't go 14-1 ATS in a major conference without getting quite a bit of price inflation. And I think that's going to be the case here with Mississippi to where, they're going to be laying too much. This is a spot where, say night, they play LSU. LSU is a pretty good team, not a great team. What's Mississippi going to be laying in that game? I would assume that, a couple of weeks ago they would have been laying 2.5 points in a game like that. Now they might be laying 6. And that is a significant difference. If you look at a game like Saturday against Arkansas, maybe they would have, a couple of weeks ago, they would have been laying, 5 points, and now they're going to be laying 9. That extra 4 points is going to be pretty often. So I think that it's something to keep in mind that, a team like Mississippi can't go 14-1 ATS. You might be able to go 14-1 ATS in a really small conference, stay under the radar at least pretty well. But this is the time of the year where college basketball is coming into focus, and if you're in the SEC and you're 14-1 ATS, I have to look at you as a fade candidate moving forward, at least for a little while.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we talk about buy points and sell points, and this is a sell point for Ole Miss. I mean, maybe they do keep rolling. Maybe that is a possibility, but you don't want to play on them with the price inflation that's coming. You either stay off of them or you look to fade them because you're getting value in going against them. And keep this in mind, too, that we talk about a lot of public money floating into the market now. Ole Miss is going to become a popular public team because people are going to go to that ATS standings page and go, oh, they're 14-1 against the spread. I can trust them. I'm going to bet on them. If you see money coming in against a team like that, that's definitely sharp money. You'd certainly rather be on the side of the sharp money more often than not.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that will happen. It's just a question of, at what price are the Sharps going to want to do that. And certainly there's going to be people who see the 14-1 ATS and they just want to blindly take Mississippi. We're just here saying that, at this point that, the train has left the station a long time ago on something like this. So, if you want to be backing a team like this, it's really too late. It should have been done earlier. And if you're just, certainly there's nothing wrong with you missing it because you weren't even betting college basketball. But you need to know ahead of time that a team that's 14-1 ATS is going to be hard to back going forward. As far as a couple teams I would like to follow here going forward, Cal State Fullerton. They're second in the nation in minutes continuity, so they have a very similar team as what they had last year. They have played the 8th toughest schedule in the country so far this year. They're 4-10 ATS. Listen, they play in the Big West. And if you know the Big West, it's not a good conference. Very few teams play defense here. There are some really weak teams in this conference. I think Fullerton's going to start covering more games. I think that this is a pretty strong follow here going forward. And I think this is a long-term look that this Fullerton team, they're a quality team. They proved that last year. And I think that they're going to be underpriced at this point, at least somewhat, based on how they've done so far this year. So I think that Fullerton's a good look going forward.
Yeah, and you look at Fullerton here in their last couple of games, they open conference play out in Hawaii, which is no fun for anybody. And then they come back and play UC Irvine at home. They go 0 of 11 from 3 in that game. They were 17 of 54 from the field overall. Just a bad shooting performance there coming off of the Hawaii road game. Not really that big of a surprise. Finally getting to play back at home. As you mentioned, they played a very, very difficult schedule. So I like this one. I like that they're a long-term look to follow for sure.
Yeah, this is one of my stronger follow plays that we've talked about here so far this year. I think that Fullerton could be a really good look. Going forward, I also would look to follow Rider. This is clearly the most talented team in MAAC, not even close. They underachieved against the number in the non-conference. I'm a little bit concerned that they've won 2 road games fairly easily. They beat Canisius by 9. Then they won against Niagara by 20 on Sunday. But Ryder won by 9 at Canisius, going 1 of 15 from three-point range. So, they don't have to shoot well from three-point range to win games. And Ryder's going to be one of the best teams on defense in this conference. They play very quickly, but they play good defense. They work hard on the defensive end. Most teams don't in this conference. And I think that Ryder, when they're not laying a huge number, which they are going to be laying a big number a decent amount of times, like this coming Saturday against Manhattan, they're going to be laying a really big number there. That's not necessarily a spot where I'd love to lay 17 or 17 and a half points with it, something like that. And I think that Ryder going forward, though, if you see them playing a road game against a decent team in this conference, I'd lay the short number with them. I think that Ryder is going to win quite a few games in the MAAC this year.
All right, so we're talking about some one-bid leagues here for the most part. The Big West, the MAAC, obviously the SEC won't be a one-bid league, but the Sun Belt also will be a one-bid league. And that probably makes it a good time to talk about the futures market here in college basketball. And I know you and I were kind of scrambling to find some futures odds this morning. Only a few books have them up. Bookmakers got them. I saw that Bovada's got them. I imagine some other places will as well. But before we mention a couple of teams here specifically, let's talk in general terms about what you want to do with March Madness futures, what you want to look to keep in mind.
Yeah, for futures, I think the key is just that you really want to find a buy point. That's we talk about these buy and sell signals, and you really need to think about it like the stock market. There's a sell-off on a team's futures because they played poorly or they had a certain injury or something like that. You just want to try to acquire futures at the right time. And I think that, I try not to lock up futures for the long term very often. So, I haven't played any futures in college basketball so far this year. But in the next few weeks, it is going to be a time I'm going to look to see, are there teams that are getting too undervalued? As we get closer and closer to the NCAA tournament, then, you're going to find more spots for things like this, because there's going to be teams that people have given up on for the season, and they shouldn't have given up on them. Or there's teams that have proven themselves time and time again, but because they haven't been good in the NCAA tournament in the past, and their odds are still pretty decent. So I think that's the way I try to look at it, is you don't want to just go in and say, on this day I'm going to try to get a bunch of futures in college basketball. You want to do this little at a time. You want to try to find the right time to buy a team. And you have to keep in mind, right after they win a national TV game that they weren't supposed to win is not a good time to buy a future. So, as far as getting a good price, it's really important.
Yeah, it is really important, knowing when to enter the market. And, I do think that it's a really good idea, and we'll talk about these teams as we go forward here as Kyle starts to, look to lock up some money. It's a good time to build up a portfolio. Grab some prices, really long prices, I think. I don't think that there's much value in playing, Tennessee under 10-1, Virginia under 7-1, something like that. There's very little equity in that. There's not a whole lot of equity in tying your money up for a price that you can probably get in a month and a half, or maybe even, when we see what the bracket draw looks like on Selection Sunday. You want to try to get some longer shot teams that maybe have some games coming up that will lower their price, will strengthen their resume, because that is really important. You look at a team that's, got a big time game coming up, something like that. Maybe they're going to be an underdog. Maybe that's a good time to buy, because if they win, the price is going to go down because they won as an underdog. If they lose, they were supposed to lose anyway, so the price probably won't adjust that much. So it can be a really difficult balance to achieve. I'm looking to take, easily, I'm not taking anything under triple digits at this point in time, because there's just not as much equity in tying it up. And you want to keep in mind that the ultimate goal of every futures bet is to make money. Your team does not have to win the national championship. They just need to get into March Madness and go deep enough to allow you to hedge off and guarantee some profit. So that's why I'm taking a look at some of the longer shots that are out there, because I don't want to have to tie up money for 2.5 months on a team that has to go to the Elite Eight for me to make anything off of it.
Yeah, exactly. You there's not too much point, like you said a minute ago, in taking a team 7-1 or something now that you could get that price later, or at least really close to it. And if you take it now, there's injury risk. Something could change. Why would you want to take 7-1 now and then, okay, their best player gets injured? You're screwed. I mean, you have no value at all. So, that's why taking the long shots makes a lot more sense. And like you said, you have to keep in mind, some people say, and I've heard this said before, some people will say, well, Team X, there's no way they're going to win it all. Well, they don't have to win it all. If it's a good enough price, then go ahead and invest in it. You want that team to get at least a couple rounds into the NCAA tournament, and then you can see what you do. So, we'll try to find some decent futures prices based on that. I'll go ahead and start it off with one that I was looking at here right now. I like Purdue plus 12,000 at Bookmaker. I talked about Purdue last time we had a segment. I think Purdue is due for some positive regression. Purdue plays in a good league. All they have to do is have a pretty good record, and they're going to make the NCAA tournament. Purdue's a well-coached team. They have a really good leader in Edwards. I think that Purdue at plus 12,000 is a pretty solid price.
Yeah, I'm disappointed you stole my thunder, because that was the one that I wanted to start with too, because, again, this is a team that, barring a disaster, makes it into the tournament, and they should have a fairly decent seed. But, as you mentioned, they're a team that should get better defensively over the course of the season, and that's also an important thing too, where, you may have a coach that is replacing a lot, not a whole lot of continuity with the roster, stuff like that. It takes time to come together. Those are the teams you want to buy on at this time of the year, because, look, how many times do we say it with Tom Izzo? And there's no value on Michigan State at 15-1 right now, but Tom Izzo is a guy that no matter how much turnover he has, that team is better by the month of March. It doesn't matter if he loses all 5 starters and the 6th man, something like that. They're better in March than they were in November or December. And I think Purdue is a team that can be that way, because they should improve on the defensive side of things. Look, they're 306th in the country right now in 3-point defense. I don't see that continuing at all. I would expect them to definitely get better, and taking them at 120 to 1. And look, I mean, we're talking about investments that are $10, $20, $50, because you're talking about such a big potential payout. We're not talking about betting full units on these teams. We're talking about betting, 10, 20, $50, and then letting that gather some equity here. I think Purdue is definitely one that could.
Yeah. Sorry I stole your thunder there. It is pretty cool, though, that of all the teams that we could be looking at the board, we'd be thinking of the same one. I think Purdue is a good look. To be honest with you, I think Nebraska plus 16,500 it is also a decent look. I think Nebraska is a pretty good team now, and the Big Ten's good enough. And Nebraska, I mean, all they have to do is not completely fall apart here, and they're going to be in the tournament. So I think a couple there from the Big Ten, and I think the one that you mentioned to me beforehand from the Big 12 is a good one as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you got to shop around for the best prices. You want to make sure that you're trying to get out there and get a good number, because every dollar, every cent matters when you talk about hedging. And the difference between getting, for example, over at Bovada, Purdue right now is 8,500, and over at Bookmaker right now, you mentioned them at 12,000. That matters. That matters so much with how long you can wait on hedging the ticket, how much you have to invest to play the other side money line, stuff like that. So I look at a team here over at Bookmaker right now. They're 215 to 1. Oklahoma. Oklahoma. They've played a very, very difficult schedule here so far this season. One of the most difficult in the country from a non-conference standpoint. And of course, they're also in the Big 12, which is a very difficult conference to win in. But they're top 10 defensively in adjusted efficiency and effective field goal percentage. And offensively, they should figure things out some more. When you're really one player dependent like they were last year with Trae Young, it takes time to figure out who your go-to scorers are, to get everybody to contribute, get everybody to do their thing. When you're getting a team that plays in a major conference that's going to make the tournament at 215 to 1, it's really hard to pass on that.
I like it. I do. I think that the knock on them, and I've heard people say it, is in their biggest games this year, they play Texas Tech, Kansas, and Wisconsin, and they've lost all those games. That's true, but they've been competitive in 2 of those 3 games, and you have to start somewhere. I mean, this Oklahoma team, like you said last year, with Trae Young, I mean, while Trae Young got all the publicity and all the love, they really weren't that good last year. I mean, they didn't play any defense last year. Lon Kruger has the type of team that he needs to have this year. Lon Kruger is known as a good defensive mind. They're playing great defense now. They play in a very good conference. Obviously, they're going to be very battle-tested. They're going to lose a decent amount of games in the Big 12 just because the Big 12 is – but I think this is a good price point.
Well, and you look at it, too. I mean, they lost in a back-to-back against Wisconsin in a neutral in one of those early season tournaments. They lost on the road at Fog Allen. That happens. There's nothing wrong with that. And they lost on the road at Lubbock. That happens. Nothing wrong with that. You're not playing in road venues here. I mean, you may have a crowd split or something like that once you get to the tournament, but you're not playing in true road venues, and you're not playing a back-to-back 5 games into the season when your best player is now in the NBA. So I think Oklahoma's I think this is a buy point on Oklahoma, because even if they lose some games here coming up, I don't know how much better this price gets.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think I'm about to make my first futures play. So, I mean, I think I like both of these that we've talked about. And I'll be honest and say that, for me, I haven't had much time at all to look at the futures market. It's something that, I'm getting the day-to-day stuff done. And then, obviously, with all the stuff that's going on here, with my son not being well and then my family in general being sick for 10 days straight, I didn't have as much time. So I'm just trying to get the day-to-day stuff done. Futures prices, now are starting to get a little bit more interesting when you're in the middle of January, and it's not really that long. When somebody asks me what futures do you like and it's November, I'm like, I'm not interested. But this time of the year, I think it's certainly there's at least some interest there. I will say that one more that I think could have, just some really, really long shot value. And this is one where I wouldn't put hardly anything on it if I did. look at the price on SMU right now, plus 120,000. SMU is a much better team than they were at the start of this season. The American Athletic Conference is not very good. I think SMU has a chance to make the NCAA tournament, and just having a chance to make the NCAA tournament at that kind of price, it might be worth putting just a very small amount of money on. I think that SMU is one of the teams that could get out of the AAC. You look at a team like Cincinnati. Cincinnati's not as good as they've been. I think Cincinnati's overvalued right now, to be honest with you. They're a team that I'd look to go against in spots now going forward. But, the AAC doesn't really have one team that's better than the rest. And Houston has a really good record this year. They're 16-1. They haven't really played anybody. They played a really weak schedule. Houston's probably the best team in this conference, but not by much if they are. And I think Houston and Cincinnati, UCF, a team like that, certainly is a potential. But I think SMU is at least in the discussion. And if you're in the discussion in a conference like that, you have that kind of price tag, I think it's worth a little bit.
I think so, too. We talk about Purdue. Maybe that's a $20 position or a $25 or a $50 position, something like that. Maybe Oklahoma, 15 or 20. SMU, you can put $5 or $10 on that, and it's better than going down to the gas station or the convenience store and buying a $5 lottery ticket. At least if SMU gets in, you can hedge that right away. You can play the other side immediately, and then you've still got some good profit potential on the back end if they happen to win a game in the NCAA tournament or something like that. It's $5 or $10 or something like that, to take a shot on a team. Really, all SMU has to do, as you mentioned, is get in. Whereas a Purdue, even though you've got a good number there with Purdue in the 120 range, you'd still like to see them win a couple of games before you start getting into that. You probably have to let that one ride into the Sweet 16. I would say SMU you can hedge right away. So keep that in mind too. That the smaller the price, the deeper the run you need them to make. So, that factors into the futures equation too.
Absolutely. And I think SMU is worth the $5 bet or whatever it may be. I think that, it's one of those things you sit there and you say, okay, it's 5 to win, 6,000. So you're sitting there saying, if I lose this and they never make it into it, it's something you're not going to think about again. It's $5. What is it? If they get in the tournament, you're sitting in a great spot. So I think that looking for long shots like that has value as well. So, you want to look for ones like Purdue and Oklahoma to where, like you said, they really need to win a couple games. So you want them to get in the tournament and win a couple games. But, once you get those really astronomical prices, then you're just hoping they make the NCAA tournament, and then you're good.
All right, so let's look at some games here this week. And again, some of these games that, could alter the futures dynamic just a little bit. And again, you don't want to go crazy with this because you are tying up your money for the next 2.5 months, essentially. And, if you're betting a higher volume day-to-day in college basketball, you'd certainly like to have some more of that capital liquid. But, we had a listener request about checking into the futures market, so I wanted to make sure that we did it here on today's show. And we'll keep updating this as we get closer to March Madness. But let's get into some games here for this weekend, and let's talk Virginia Tech and Virginia to open things up.
Before I say anything about this, I will say that I really like talking about the futures market. I was sitting here just thinking, I'm really glad a listener asked about that because it's something that I haven't looked at. And as I look at it, I'm like, man, I remember how much I like this, And as we get to the conference tournament time, I know that's some of our favorite shows that we ever do. And so it's nice to be able to talk about that. And I hope we can follow up on that as we go forward. Virginia Tech and Virginia. Virginia Tech's played really well this year. They've been very, very good. At 14-1. They haven't played a really tough schedule, but they have a couple nice wins here. They've got a neutral site win over Purdue. They won on the road at Georgia Tech in their last game, but Virginia's on a different level. What's going to happen in a game like this as far as the total? I think I'm most interested in the total because, Virginia Tech used to be a team that was really pushing pace, and now they've really slowed down significantly. They are 328th out of 353 in tempo. Virginia, obviously, we know what they are. They're 353rd. They are the slowest team in the country. They play tremendous defense. The one thing that's different about Virginia this year compared to the past years, they're a lot better on offense than they've been before. They're 6th in offensive efficiency according to Ken Palm. Last year they were 30th. And 30th and 6th might not sound like a huge difference, but it is a really, really big difference. I think that Virginia and the kind of contributions they've got from Kyle Guy has been tremendous from outside, 46%, 46 for 100 from three-point range, so plenty of volume there as well. And Ty Jerome's a very consistent performer. I really think that this is one of those games where Virginia Tech has been very good this year. I like Virginia Tech as a team, but I would lean toward laying it here with Virginia. I think that Virginia could make a statement in a game like this. You look at Virginia's big games so far this year, they've won quite a few of these key games by a large margin. They just beat Clemson by 20. It's usually because they're holding the other team to a very small amount of points. But, you know, it wouldn't be surprising if Virginia puts it on Virginia Tech a little bit here. Now, I will say I don't necessarily know that I'm going to be playing this one, but I think it's a very interesting game to find out where Virginia Tech is, because it's kind of one of those measuring stick games. They haven't had this type of game. Here it is.
Well, here's a question for you. Now, this is an in-state rivalry game, and obviously, you know, Virginia will be fully focused on it. They go to Cameron Indoor on Saturday and play Duke. So what about that? I mean, is there any semblance of a look-ahead factor here?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that Tony Bennett's a really good coach. I think Virginia has shown that they're there every time. I know that Virginia lost in the 1-16 game, and everybody's going to talk about that for years, and I know that's the case. And we've talked about before that Virginia is really at a disadvantage for the fact that, you know, when you play as slow as they do, games tend to be closer. So it's going to be a little bit harder for them to win at all than somebody else who has more possessions to try to pull away. Having said that, Virginia is a really good team, and I don't think that we should think too much about what happened last year. I think that Tony Bennett will have them ready for this game. I think the fact that it is Virginia Tech, it'd be really hard for them to overlook. If they were playing Wake Forest at home here, I think that would be a good time to look at taking the points. But in this one, I think they'll be fully focused.
All right, so let's go down to the SEC here for a Tuesday night showdown. This one, Florida out on the road against Mississippi State. What's the thought here, Kyle?
You know, we talked about Florida and Tennessee last time, and Florida was beating Tennessee a decent amount of that game. You know, they were ahead probably more than half the game. They totally fell apart at the end of that game. I think it was, a 2-point game with a couple minutes left or something like that. They end up losing by 11. Florida just couldn't do anything right at the end of that game. I still think Florida's better than what they've shown so far this year. They're 9-6. They've been terrible on offense. I mean, in the SEC, they're averaging 0.938 points per possession. That's really, really bad. And in the SEC, they're shooting 39% on 2-point shots. So this is a Florida offense that's been really, really bad. I have to think it'll be better than it's been so far. The thing that I'm interested in here is Mississippi State and whether they can bounce back. This Mississippi State team had played well this year. Then they lose in overtime to South Carolina, a game that really they couldn't lose. And then they lose at home to Mississippi. They need to bounce back here. They need this one. But Florida coming off a disappointing loss to Tennessee, I think this is a really fascinating handicap here. You know, my lean would be taking Florida plus the points. I don't know how many points you're going to be able to get. I think the odds makers know that Florida is better than their record. So, you know, you're not going to get anything like Florida plus 5.5. I don't think that's going to happen. But, you know, if you can get Florida plus a full possession, you know, get 3 or 3.5, that would be my lean in this game. I think that Mississippi State still has to show that, you know, they can consistently be a good team. Florida, like I said, has played poorly this year. But Mike White's a very good coach. They've been very good the last couple years. That would be my lean in this game.
All right, so let's move out to the A-10 here. And the A-10 is it's a difficult conference to figure out right now. I mean, I'm not really sure if there's a standout team. There's some pretty good teams. There's some pretty bad teams here too. But we're going to talk about Dayton and VCU here in this one. This game coming up on Wednesday night. Dayton out on the road in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, you know, there's a couple of reasons I want to talk about this one. First of all, I think that VCU on defense this year, just out of this world good. I can't believe how well they keep playing on defense. If you look at them last year, they were 156th in defensive efficiency, 209th in effective field goal percentage defense. What are they this year? They're 6th and third in those two categories. I keep thinking it's going to fall off. I still think it probably will. But this VCU defense is clearly much improved. On offense, they're still playing fast, but they are not efficient on offense. Dayton's kind of the opposite. Dayton's a team that's very efficient on offense. They're okay on defense. They're not bad. Dayton's a fairly inexperienced team. However, Dayton has some quality talent. They've recruited well. VCU is not that experienced either. They have a really deep bench is their biggest plus. To me, my lean here would be to play the over, thinking that VCU is not going to keep that defense going quite as good as it's been, and Dayton's proven that they can be very efficient on offense. If you look at Dayton, they've been scoring a decent amount of points pretty consistently. They haven't had very many games at all where they don't score many points. Against Oklahoma and against Virginia, they didn't score much, but nobody scores very much, especially if you're an A-10 team against teams like that. So if we get a low enough number here, I would lean toward taking the over.
Well, and you look at this situation here for Dayton, only their second true road game since early December. It looks like only their third true road game of the season here for Dayton. They played at Auburn, then they played at George Washington last Wednesday. So, you mentioned a little bit of a younger team here, and, sometimes those younger teams, not to say that they're all going to fall flat going on the road, but you get a little nervous, you get a little jumpy. Maybe this is a game that's got a little bit more tempo to it as well, because you look at some of their games here, very up and down from a tempo standpoint. Almost looks like the other team kind of dictating how the game flow goes.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I would make, is that Dayton seems to be a team that lets the other team dictate tempo, and I think that's something that's actually a really good point. I know that we've been running for a little while now, so I won't say too much about it, but that's something that we can talk about in depth in the future. I think that trying to figure out who is very good at dictating tempo is a tremendous thing to do when you're handicapping college basketball. There are some teams that are going to get their style of play. There's other teams that are just, I'd say they're almost like a chameleon. They do whatever the other team does, and that's what's going on. So I think that VCU will likely be able to dictate the tempo in this one, and I think you're going to have a pretty low total. You might get a total in the upper 120s. If so, I think the over has some value.
All right, let's go to Thursday night here. Big-time road game for Sparty and Tom Izzo. They are at Nebraska. And Nebraska, since Pinnacle Bank Arena opened, has been absurdly good.
Yeah, I would lean toward Nebraska here. I have to be honest. I think they have a tremendous home court advantage. I think that Michigan State's a good team, but I think that they might not be quite as good as some people think they are right now. And, this day exactly, because like you said earlier, I want nothing to do with going against Tom Izzo when you get to March. But, I think that Michigan State's a quality team, but not this unbeatable team. Ohio State led them for the majority of the game in that game at Ohio State. And Ohio State's really not that good. They're well coached. He gets the most out of them, does Holtman, but not a great team. Nebraska is a more talented team than is Ohio State. I don't think there's any question about that. Nebraska has a better home court advantage than Ohio State as well. You've got a Nebraska team that should be very ready for a game like this. They know that this is the type of game that can make a season. Nebraska probably going to be catching a couple points in this one. I would lean toward taking Nebraska here, and this will be one that I at least consider. I think that Nebraska is good enough on defense, and they're much more efficient on offense now than they've been in the past, to where I really feel that this Nebraska team has a chance in a game like this. The one huge caveat, and I have to say this, they're not good at getting defensive rebounds, and that's a really big concern. I would say without that, I would be saying I'd be taking Nebraska in this game. I'm not sure if I'll take Nebraska on that, because everybody knows how good Michigan State is on the offensive glass. They're going to get a lot of second chance opportunities here. So can Nebraska overcome that? I certainly think they still have a chance, but that's the one caveat here.
Nebraska 25-1 straight up at Pinnacle Bank Arena, 19-3-1 against the spread. One of the games they didn't cover, one of my video picks last week on Penn State. So, we'll see if they're able to bounce back there at home in this one. That stat coming from our fellow Bang the Book guest, Rolf Michaels, that he mentioned on Twitter last week. So One more game to talk about here. You know we got to go under the radar because we certainly love to do that. Let's go out to the Missouri Valley Conference here for our last game on this Handicapping the Hardwood segment for Drake and Bradley on Wednesday night.
Yeah, Drake is a team that lost their best offensive player in Nick Norton. They've played well without him so far, to be honest with you. I didn't think that they'd be as good as they would on offense, or as good as they have been on offense against Loyola and against Southern Illinois. Now, against Northern Iowa, some of their problems showed up, and I will say I kind of followed this game a little bit because I strongly considered Northern Iowa yesterday as a possible play for the daily article at BangTheBook.com. So, the games that I really lean strongly and I almost take, I watched pretty closely. Northern Iowa was -2 at the time. They ended up winning by 3, so I kind of wish I had picked it, but obviously, it wasn't really a great pick. The thing that was most interesting about that game was it was 55-54 with 5:40 left or something in the game. It was more than 5 minutes. It stayed 55-54 until there were like 5 seconds left in the game. I don't think I've ever seen that. I've watched a lot of basketball. I've followed a lot of basketball over the years. I don't think I've seen a game go scoreless for more than 5 minutes, especially at the end of a game that's closed. So really, really crazy game there. I will say that I think Drake is in a difficult spot here. My lean is certainly with Bradley in this game. Bradley's kind of desperate at this point. I mean, they're 0-4 in the conference. Team that was expected to be pretty decent. I don't know what the preseason predictions were from the coaches or from the media and the NVC, but I know that they wouldn't have been expected to be at the bottom of the conference. Bradley had a lot of guys back from a team that's been, pretty decent. They were 20-13 last year. This is a team that, has been going in the right direction under Brian Wardle. Now they've had disappointing losses here in the conference. Now they catch a Drake team that's shorthanded, coming off a tough loss to Northern Iowa. They've had 2 double overtime games here in the last few weeks. I think this is a Drake team that's in a difficult spot. I think that Bradley needs that first win. I'm very curious to see what the line is here. I think Bradley will probably be a small favorite, and I would lean toward Bradley.
Well, and as you look at Drake here, you mentioned Nick Norton going out. He went out in the Evansville game, 82-77 in double overtime. That was a game played at 91 possessions. Since Norton went out, 65 possessions, 64 possessions, 59 possessions in that last game against Northern Iowa. So, Drake's slowing down the tempo a little bit here too. Bradley, a team that doesn't really run a ton. So, it should be a very interesting matchup, not just to see, if Bradley can take advantage of the spot, but also to see if Drake continues that trend of really mucking up and slowing down the game.
Yeah, I think that Bradley's defense is the reason that they usually have low-scoring games. They're one of the better defenses in this conference, or they have been in the past, and their offense is always inefficient. In the conference so far this year, Bradley averaging 0.845 points per possession. Really, really bad. They've been shooting very poorly. They turn it over a lot. I think that this is a possible turnaround game for Bradley, and I think that they're better than their record would indicate. I think that Drake kind of limps into this game a little bit shorthanded. It's a good spot here for Bradley.
So Kyle Hunter doing that daily picks piece over at BangTheBook.com, also doing his weekly situational spots piece, and you've still got a lot of things going on over at HunterSportsPicks.com as well.
Yeah, college basketball price has been lowered on the site. If you want to get in on college basketball, I also am still offering that special that I mentioned last week for $450. Just mentioned Bang the Book Radio. I've had a couple people ask if I would include NBA in on it. Yes, you can have NBA as well, and I'll make that $600 for the two of them combined. So if you're interested in that, Kyle at HunterSportsPicks.com or at KyleHunterPicks on Twitter. Also, be sure to follow along with the newsletter. Sign up for that if you haven't already. There's free picks coming from there. Haven't sent as many of those newsletter free picks lately based on everything that's gone on, but going to pick back up with those. So if you're not already a member of the newsletter list, those picks are totally free. You can sign up at HunterSportsPicks.com.
And again, at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. Kyle, appreciate the time. Thanks for doing the full show today, man. Really had a good time with it. And we'll talk to you again later in the week.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.